In 1897, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker sat down at his desk and gave a name to his vampire: Dracula. The book became the most famous horror novel ever written. The name became synonymous with the undead, with fangs and capes and castles in the mist. But Stoker didn't invent the name. He borrowed it. 400 years before the novel was published, the name Dracula belonged to a man, a prince of Wallachia, a kingdom wedged between the Ottoman Empire and the Christian West. His father had been inducted into the Order of the Dragon, earning himself the title Dracul. The son inherited it. Dracula, son of the dragon, son of the devil. The things he did made Stoker's fiction look tame. He impaled 20,000 people and left them standing in the sun. He attacked at midnight and vanished before dawn. When he died, they buried him in a monastery on an island, and when archaeologists opened the tomb 5 centuries later, it was empty. The real Dracula didn't need fangs. He had stakes, and the blood he spilled was real. On September 25, 1396, the largest Christian army assembled in a century rode south toward the Danube. French knights in gleaming plate armor led the van, their horses draped in silk caparisons embroidered with the fleur-de-lis. Behind them came Hungarian heavy cavalry, Burgundian nobles, German mercenaries, knights from England and Poland, and the Italian city-states, Wallachian auxiliaries who knew the terrain, and Hospitaller knights who had sailed from Rhodes. Contemporary chronicles estimated their strength at over 100,000 men. Modern historians suggest the true number was closer to 16,000, still the largest crusading force since the fall of Acre a century before. They had come for one purpose: to break the Ottoman advance into the Balkans and push the Sultan's armies back across the Bosporus. Pope Boniface IX had blessed the enterprise. The King of France had funded it. The King of Hungary, a young man named Sigismund of Luxembourg, had organized it. And every knight in that column believed God was on their side. They called it a crusade, the last great crusade of medieval Europe. And on the fields outside a fortress called Nicopolis, it would end in a single afternoon. The Ottoman Sultan Bayezid I had studied the Crusaders. Men called him the Thunderbolt for the speed of his campaigns. He had conquered more territory in 10 years than his father had in 30. He understood European warfare. He understood European pride, and he understood exactly how to use that pride against them. The French knights were the finest heavy cavalry in Christendom, and they knew it. When the battle began, they demanded the honor of the first charge. Sigismund argued against it. He knew the terrain. He knew that Bayezid had infantry screens designed to absorb exactly this kind of frontal assault. But the French would not be denied their glory. They charged. They broke through the Ottoman front lines, and then they crested the hill and saw what Bayezid had hidden behind it. 10,000 fresh Sipahi cavalry, mounted archers, and the elite Janissary Corps, troops that had not yet fought. The Crusaders were exhausted. Their horses were blown, and they were surrounded. The slaughter lasted hours. The French commander, Jean de Nevers, was captured. The Count of Eu was captured. Sigismund's own brother-in-law was captured. When the killing stopped, Bayezid ordered mass executions. Thousands of prisoners were killed where they knelt. Those of high enough birth to be valuable were ransomed back to their families for sums that bankrupted noble houses across Europe. The ransom for Jean de Nevers alone was 200,000 gold florins, enough to build a cathedral. Among those who escaped the carnage was Sigismund himself. He fled down the Danube by fishing boat, traveling through the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, a journey of months before he finally reached his own kingdom again. His armor was dented, his army was annihilated, His reputation as a military leader was destroyed. He had staked everything on this crusade: his treasury, his political capital, his claim to leadership of Christian Europe, and he had lost. For 12 years, Sigismund rebuilt. He secured his throne against rivals who smelled weakness. He consolidated his alliances. He watched the Ottomans continue their advance, taking more of the Balkans, pressing ever closer to the heart of Europe. And he planned. On December 12, 1408, in the city of Oradea, Sigismund created something new. He called together 24 of the most powerful lords in his realm: Hungarian barons, Serbian despots, Transylvanian voivodes, and bound them together in a secret order. A brotherhood of Christian knights sworn to a single purpose: to defend the faith against its enemies, to protect Sigismund's dynasty, and to ensure that Nicopolis would never happen again. He named it the Societas Draconistrarum, the Society of the Dragonists. In common speech, the Order of the Dragon. Its members would wear a symbol, an Ouroboros, a dragon curved in a circle with its tail wrapped around its own neck, swallowing itself. The Signum Draconis, the sign of the dragon. It represented the enemy to be defeated. It represented the eternal vigilance required to defeat him, and it would give a name to a dynasty that would haunt Europe for generations. In 1431, a Wallachian warlord named Vlad arrived at Sigismund's court in Nuremberg. Sigismund was Holy Roman Emperor now, the most powerful Christian monarch in Europe. Vlad was a claimant to a minor throne, Wallachia, a principality south of Transylvania, wedged between the Kingdom of Hungary and the expanding Ottoman Empire. It was a buffer state, a place that existed only because larger powers found it useful as a barrier. Vlad had come to pledge his loyalty. In exchange, Sigismund would support his claim to the Wallachian throne against his rivals. The emperor inducted Vlad into the Order of the Dragon. He placed the pendant around Vlad's neck, the same Ouroboros symbol that Sigismund had worn since he founded the order in the aftermath of Nicopolis, 23 years before. The same symbol that marked a man as a defender of Christendom against the Ottoman threat. The same symbol that would pass from father to son. From that day forward, Vlad was known by a new name: Vlad Dracul, Vlad the Dragon. He would wear the pendant for the rest of his life. He would mint coins bearing the dragon symbol. He would build his entire political identity around the order and what it represented. But in Romanian, the word carries a second meaning. Dracul means dragon. Dracul also means devil. The peasants who saw Vlad Dracul ride past, the dragon pendant glinting at his throat, did not always know which word they meant. That same year, 1431, Vlad Dracul's wife gave birth to a son. The boy was born in Sighișoara, a fortified town in Transylvania where Vlad was stationed as a military commander. They named him Vlad after his father, but the people would call him by a different name. The town of Sighișoara sits on a hill in the heart of Transylvania. In 1431, it was a Saxon citadel, a fortified German-speaking colony planted by the Kingdom of Hungary to guard the Carpathian passes. The walls had stood for 3 centuries. 14 towers ringed the perimeter, each maintained by a different guild: the Tailor's Tower, the Furrier's Tower, the Tinsmith's Tower. At the center rose the Clock Tower, 64 meters tall, its mechanical clock marking the hours for merchants and soldiers and priests. The streets inside the walls were narrow and cobbled, crowded with timber-framed houses, painted in fading yellows and blues and reds. The air smelled of wood smoke and tanneries and the livestock markets in the lower town. German was spoken in the guild halls. Latin was spoken in the churches. And in a house on Tin Street, A Wallachian noble and his wife were expecting their second son. The house still stands today. It sits at Tin Street number 1. In the 15th century, it belonged to Vlad Dracula, the man who had just received the dragon pendant from Emperor Sigismund. His wife, possibly a daughter of the Prince of Moldavia, though the records are unclear, gave birth in that house sometime in late 1431. The child would have spent his first years within those walls, within that citadel. He would have heard the clock tower mark the hours. He would have watched the guild processions on feast days, the furriers and tailors and blacksmiths marching with their banners. He would have learned his first words in a household where power was measured in swords and alliances and the favor of distant kings. His father wore the dragon, the badge Vlad would inherit, along with the name. In 1436, when the boy was 4 or 5 years old, his father finally seized the throne of Wallachia. The family left Sighishuara and moved south, into the principality that Vlad Dracula had spent years fighting to claim. The boy would never return to the house where he was born, but he would carry its legacy, the dragon, the name, the violence that came with both, for the rest of his life. By 1442, Vlad Dracula had spent 6 years trying to survive between two empires. To the northwest lay the Kingdom of Hungary, the Christian power that had installed him on the Wallachian throne and expected his loyalty in return. The Hungarians controlled Transylvania, where Vlad had once governed fortresses and where his son had been born. They expected him to guard the mountain passes against Ottoman incursion. To the southeast lay the Ottoman Sultanate, the Islamic Empire that had conquered the Balkans, crushed the Crusade at Nicopolis, and now cast its shadow over every principality between Constantinople and Vienna. Wallachia sat between them, a buffer zone, a prize, a trap. Vlad Dracula had joined the Order of the Dragon. He had sworn to fight the Ottomans, but oaths were luxuries for kings with armies, and Vlad Dracula had neither. His principality was poor, his treasury empty, his boyar lords more interested in their own estates than in crusading ventures. After Sigismund's death in 1437, Hungary entered a succession crisis. The support Vlad had counted on evaporated. In 1438, desperate, he made a different choice. He paid homage to Sultan Murad II and joined an Ottoman raid into Transylvania, the same Transylvania where his son had been born, the same territory he was sworn to defend as a Knight of the Dragon. He burned villages, he took prisoners, he proved his loyalty to the Crescent instead of the Cross. By 1441, the political winds shifted again. A Hungarian warlord named John Hunyadi was carving through Ottoman forces in Transylvania, winning victory after victory. He urged Vlad to join a new crusade against the Sultan. Vlad hesitated. He had already betrayed the Ottomans once by swearing to the dragon. He had betrayed the Hungarians by raiding with the Turks. Now, both sides watched him, waiting for him to choose. In March 1442, Hunyadi won a crushing victory over an Ottoman army in Transylvania. The Sultan noticed that Vlad Dracula had not lifted a finger to help. Murad II sent a summons to the Wallachian prince. "Come to Edirne, explain yourself, and bring your sons." Vlad Dracula rode to Edirne with a small retinue. He brought his 2 youngest sons with him, Vlad, age 11, and Radu, age 7. His eldest son, Mircea, he left behind in Wallachia. Perhaps Vlad thought their presence would demonstrate good faith, a sign that he had nothing to hide, that his family trusted the Sultan's hospitality. Perhaps he had no choice. The summons may have specifically demanded the boys. The historical record does not say what he told the boys as they rode east across the Danube and into Ottoman territory. It does not say whether they understood where they were going or why. The journey took weeks. They crossed river valleys and mountain passes, traveling roads where Ottoman soldiers collected tolls and Ottoman administrators kept records of every caravan that passed. The deeper they traveled into the Sultan's territory, the more the landscape changed. Bulgarian churches converted to mosques, Greek-speaking merchants replaced by Turkish traders, the crescent flag flying over every fortress and watchtower. By the time they reached Edirne, they had entered another world. Edirne was the Ottoman capital, a city of minarets and palaces, of markets that sold silk and spices from Persia and India, of administrative buildings where the affairs of an empire were managed with ruthless efficiency. The population was larger than any city Vlad had ever seen. The wealth was staggering: fountains in public squares, domed mosques covered in painted tiles, gardens where tulips bloomed in geometric precision. When Vlad Dracula arrived at the Sultan's court, he was escorted through courtyards designed to impress and intimidate. The meeting that followed did not go well. Murad II accused Vlad of treachery. He pointed to Vlad's membership in the Order of the Dragon, an organization explicitly founded to destroy the Ottoman Empire. He pointed to Vlad's failure to send troops when the Ottoman army marched into Transylvania. The Sultan had a simple question: whose side was Vlad Dracula on? Vlad had no good answer. He was arrested on the spot. The terms of Vlad's release were brutal. He would pay an annual tribute to the Sultan, 10,000 gold ducats, a sum that would drain his treasury. He would send 500 Wallachian boys each year to be conscripted into the Janissary Corps, the Sultan's elite infantry, drawn from Christian children converted to Islam and trained to die for the empire. And he would leave his 2 youngest sons behind as hostages. Vlad Dracula accepted. He had no choice. The alternative was execution and the installation of a more compliant puppet on the Wallachian throne. At least this way, he could return to his kingdom. At least this way, he could hope his sons might someday come home. Before the end of 1442, Vlad rode back to Wallachia alone. His sons remained in Ottoman custody. Vlad, age 11, and Radu, age 7, were escorted to the fortress of Erigos in Anatolia, hundreds of miles from home, surrounded by strangers who spoke a language they did not understand, hostages for a father they would not see again for years. The boys were not prisoners in the usual sense. They were investments. The Ottomans had learned that the best way to control a hostile principality was to raise its future rulers themselves, train them in Ottoman customs, teach them Turkish and Arabic, indoctrinate them in the ways of the court. Then, when the current ruler died or became inconvenient, install the hostage prince on the throne with Ottoman backing. He would be grateful. He would be loyal. He would be theirs. Radu would become exactly what they hoped. Vlad would become something else entirely. For 6 years, the 2 Wallachian princes lived within the system their father's surrender had bought them. The Ottomans called it education. It was closer to indoctrination. Another hostage prince, an Albanian named Gjergj Kastrioti, had been raised in this same palace school a generation earlier. The Ottomans trained him, converted him, gave him a new name, Skanderbeg, and trusted him with an army. He defected the moment he had the chance, returned to Albania, and spent the rest of his life fighting his former masters. The Ottomans remembered that failure. They watched their hostages more carefully now. Vlad and Radu were enrolled in the same schools that trained the sons of Ottoman nobility. They learned Turkish and Arabic. They studied calligraphy, mathematics, logic, and the Quran. They were taught horsemanship by cavalrymen who had conquered half of Europe. They learned archery and swordsmanship from soldiers who had faced Crusader knights at Nicopolis and won. The education was excellent. The surveillance was constant. Every servant might be a spy. Every friendship might be a test. Every letter from home was read before it reached them, if it reached them at all. The two brothers responded to captivity in opposite ways. Radu had been young enough to adapt, young enough to forget. He learned Turkish easily. He made friends among the Ottoman princes. He was beautiful, with delicate features and dark curling hair, and the Ottomans valued beauty. By the time he was 10, Radu had caught the attention of a young prince named Mehmed, the Sultan's son, heir to the throne. The two became close. How close? The historical sources do not agree. But Radu found a place in the Ottoman court. He converted to Islam. He became a favorite. He forgot his Romanian. He forgot his father's faith. He stopped speaking to his brother about home. Vlad was 11, had been old enough to remember everything. Old enough to remember his father kneeling before the Sultan. Old enough to remember the terms, the tribute, the Janissary boys, the humiliation. He learned Turkish because he had to. He learned Ottoman customs because refusing meant punishment. But he never adapted. He never made friends. He was sullen, defiant, insubordinate. The court records note that he was disciplined repeatedly for his behavior. Beatings, confinement, reduced rations. When other hostage princes learned to bow correctly, Vlad bowed wrong on purpose. When instructors demanded respect, Vlad gave silence. When guards tried to force him to pray in the Ottoman fashion, he spat. In 1444, news reached the hostages. Their father had joined a new crusade against the Ottomans. Vlad Dracula had sent troops to support the Christian coalition at the Battle of Varna. The crusade failed. The Hungarian-Polish king died on the battlefield. The Christian army was annihilated. But Vlad Dracula had shown his true loyalties. The Sultan was furious. Vlad and Radu's lives hung by a thread. Only the need to keep leverage over Wallachia saved them. The Ottomans had broken princes before. They expected to break this one too. But every punishment they gave Vlad only hardened him further. They were creating the very thing they feared. What Vlad witnessed in those 6 years would shape everything that came after. The Ottoman Empire ruled through power, but it also ruled through terror. Executions were public, punishments were theatrical, and one method of execution was used above all others to send a message: impalement. The Ottomans did not invent it. The Assyrians had used it. The Persians had used it. The Romans had used it. They called it crucifixion. But the Ottomans perfected it as a tool of psychological warfare. Traitors, rebels, criminals, all were displayed on stakes in public squares, their bodies visible for days, a warning to anyone who might consider defiance. Vlad was made to watch. The historical sources are clear on this. Hostage princes were deliberately shown what happened to those who challenged Ottoman authority. It was part of the education. Learn your lessons, obey your masters, or end up on a stake. Most hostage princes learned the intended lesson. They came away afraid, compliant, grateful for the Sultan's mercy. Vlad learned something different. He did not learn to fear impalement. He learned how it was done. He studied the method, the positioning of the stake, the angle, the way bodies were arranged for maximum visibility. He memorized the logistics, how many soldiers it took, how long the victims survived, how far the screams carried. The Ottomans meant to teach him obedience. Instead, they gave him a weapon. Something died in that boy during those 6 years in Ottoman captivity. Something else was born. When Vlad finally returned to Wallachia, he would bring the lessons of the Ottoman court with him. He would show his enemies what he had learned, and he would surpass his teachers. In late November 1447, John Hunyadi crossed the Carpathian Mountains with an army. The same John Hunyadi who had urged Vlad Dracula to join the crusade against the Ottomans 5 years earlier. The same John Hunyadi whose victory had forced Vlad to submit to the Sultan's summons. Now Hunyadi was coming to finish what he had started. The political situation had become untenable. Vlad Dracul had spent years trying to balance between Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, and he had satisfied neither. When Hunyadi called for crusade, Vlad sent a token force, enough to anger the Sultan, not enough to satisfy the Christians. When the crusade failed at Varna in 1444, Hunyadi blamed Vlad for the defeat. When Vlad made peace with the Ottomans to protect his sons, Hunyadi called him a traitor to Christendom. Hunyadi was the most powerful military commander in Eastern Europe. He had spent 2 decades fighting the Ottomans. He had broken their armies at Transylvania. He had defended Belgrade. And he had decided that Vlad Dracul was more useful dead than alive. Hunyadi brought a claimant with him, Vladislav II, a cousin of Vlad Dracul from a rival branch of the family. The message was clear. Wallachia would have a new prince, one who would do what Hunyadi commanded, one who would not play games with the Sultan. Vlad Dracul fled Targoviste before Hunyadi arrived. He knew he could not hold the capital against a Hungarian army. He gathered what loyal men he could find and rode south, hoping to reach Ottoman territory where the Sultan might offer protection. But Hunyadi had planned for this. Hungarian cavalry cut off the southern roads. Vlad was forced into the marshes, the wetlands near a village called Baltani, where the ground was soft and horses moved slowly. They caught him in the fog. The details of Vlad Dracul's death are sparse in the historical record. We know he was killed in late November or early December 1447. We know he died in the marshes of Baltani. We know his body was left where it fell. No state funeral, no tomb, no monument. The man who had worn the dragon pendant for 16 years ended his life in the mud. The Order of the Dragon had been founded to defend Christendom against the Ottomans. Vlad Dracul had been inducted into the order by the emperor himself, and he died at the hands of Christians, killed by the same Hungarian faction that the order was supposed to serve. Mircea's death was worse. Vlad's eldest son had been left behind in Wallachia when his father fled. He was captured by the Saxon elite of Targoviste, the German merchant class that controlled much of the city's economy and resented Vlad Dracul's policies. They had allied with Hunyadi. They had scores to settle. The historical sources describe what happened next in clinical terms. Mircea was blinded with a hot iron poker. Then he was buried alive. The merchants and boyars who did this left his body in an unmarked grave somewhere near Targoviste. He was in his late teens, perhaps 20 years old. He had been co-ruler of Wallachia alongside his father. He had expected to inherit the throne. Instead, he died screaming in the dark. The last thing he ever saw, the red glow of the iron coming toward his eyes. Mircea's death was not just murder, it was a message. The boyars and Saxons who killed him wanted Hunyadi to know they were committed. They wanted to prove their loyalty to the new regime, and they wanted to ensure that Vlad Dracul's bloodline would have no easy path back to power. They did not know that 2 of Vlad's sons were still alive, hostages in the Ottoman court, hundreds of miles away. They did not know that one of those sons would remember. The news reached Vlad in the Ottoman court sometime in early 1448. His father was dead. His elder brother was dead. The throne of Wallachia belonged to a usurper backed by the same Hungarian lords who had inducted Vlad Dracul into the Order of the Dragon. The dragon pendant, the symbol his father had worn for 16 years, the symbol that gave Vlad his name, was gone, lost in a marsh or taken as a trophy by the men who killed him. Vlad was 17 years old. He had been a hostage for 6 years. He had watched his brother Radu forget their family, forget their faith, forget everything except how to please the Ottoman court. He had witnessed executions. He had endured punishments. He had learned to hide every